We start tonight with some breaking news. We can now project that Bill Gates will be elected the 47th President of the United States, narrowly defeating Warren Buffett by just under 1 billion votes. As of 2 o'clock this morning, Mr. Gates had 231.8 billion votes, and Mr. Buffett had 230.1 billion votes. And therefore, we can project now that Mr. Gates will be the 47th President of the United States. The 2024 election was the first presidential election held since the 2022 decision in Corporations United versus the Federal Elections Commission, which for the first time gave corporations the right to vote, which led millions of citizens to create hundreds or thousands of dummy corporations so that they could increase their votes. Several third-party candidates trail far behind with fewer than 5 billion votes each. All right, let's come back to the present here. Let's all get into the TARDIS here we have to transport ourselves back to the present. Don't worry, the TARDIS is infinite, so you'll all fit inside the TARDIS. Come on back to 2016 with me. Let's be reckless. Travel back to 2017. What the heck just happened? Well, obviously, it's kind of a silly idea to have corporations being allowed the right to vote, right? But when you think about it, it's almost the next logical step in the process of where we have gone so far. Corporations have been slowly getting more and more political rights granted by the Supreme Court as time goes forward, and the next logical step seems to be just let them vote directly. And that's kind of what the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United kind of leads to. In 2010, the United States Supreme Court overturned major portions of the McCain-Feingold Bipartisan Campaign Finance Act and held that corporations now may spend money directly in support of candidates for office. And here's the key language from that case. We find no basis for the proposition that, in the context of political speech, the government may impose restrictions on certain disfavored speakers. Really? Corporations are speakers, and they have the right of political speech. It's explicit in the court's holding. Now, this opinion depends on a metaphor that corporations are people too. There's another metaphor, money is speech. There's another metaphor that this case depends on both of them. But let's examine for a moment this idea that corporations are people too. Does that make any sense? Think about it for a second. Would we allow corporations to get married? Would we allow corporations to have children? All right, corporations can't adopt children, can they? Oh, come on. If a corporation got sick, you wouldn't give it government medical care, would you? All right. Now you're going to tell me that corporations can have religious beliefs. The idea that corporations are people too is actually kind of well-settled law. As you can see, it has served the corporations pretty well so far. But let's examine it a little more closely. This is not a new idea that corporations are people too. It actually has its origins in the 19th century, a case called Santa Clara County versus the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1878 held that corporations are people. It's kind of where this whole idea got started. The Santa Clara County case involved taxing fences. The railroad company, the Southern Pacific Railroad, owned fences and decided that, and the Santa Clara County taxed those fences at a rate higher than it taxed fences owned by other people. The corporation thought, this is not fair. Why should we pay higher tax rates than human beings do? So they filed suit claiming that this tax rate was a violation of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which says, quote, "No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Now, see how this works? In order to claim the benefit of equal protection, the corporation has to argue that it's a person. So it argued, yes, we are a person, therefore we're entitled to the equal protection of the laws. The court didn't decide that. What happened instead was, before the case got argued in the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice apparently said something to this effect: the court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the 14th Amendment to the Constitution applies to these corporations. We are of the opinion that it does. So don't argue about that. Assume, for the purposes of this argument, that you're a person. Now let's talk about whether the fences are taxed correctly. And that was the end of the case. And turns out the case was they should have equal taxation. Now, for the purposes of property rights, I can sort of see why this assumption makes sense. They didn't decide it, but they assumed for this purpose that they have the same rights as other people. But this case has been taken to be the origin of the idea that corporations are people too. It turns out it was the first step down a very slippery slope leading to where we are today. And as cases have been decided up to and including and subsequent to Citizens United, more rights have been given to corporations as we go forward. So the idea that corporations are people is a metaphor. Metaphors are really powerful things. Amos Tversky, who is one of the fathers of the modern study of cognitive psychology, says that metaphors are really a substitute for thinking. They resonate so deep inside of us, if they seem to make sense, we follow them even when it becomes illogical to do so. He actually says a metaphor is a cover-up. And that's where we're at. We have this metaphor now that we can't seem to break away from. So let's dig a little deeper here into the idea that corporations are people. That sounds silly to most of you, but to a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, it's not so silly. It's something that we call in the law a legal fiction. It started that way. I think actually it's gone beyond a legal fiction, but a legal fiction is a concept that lawyers understand, and we use it to solve cases that can't be solved any other way. It's basically, we assume for the purposes of this one case, with one situation, that something which clearly is not true, we'll assume that it is true, so that we can solve this problem and get to a result that everybody would agree is the correct result. The best example I can give you of a legal fiction is adoption. You're going to adopt a child, and every child needs to have a birth certificate that accurately reflects the time, date, and place of birth, their name, and the parents. So in Wyoming, as in probably every state in the Union, by law, by statute, when a child is adopted, the state will issue a new birth certificate listing the correct name of the child, time, date, and place of birth. They're all accurate, but listing the adoptive parents as the parents. Now, we all know that the mother was not in the delivery room that day, time, and place, giving birth to that child. That's the little white lie, the legal fiction, the little white lie that we tell in order to give this child a birth certificate that the child needs and deserves to have. The problem is that when corporations are people started out, maybe it was a legal fiction. It's gone well beyond that, though, because it's no longer being used simply to solve a problem in a way that makes sense. It's being used to create new rights that maybe the corporation didn't need to have and may be controversial. So in a sense, this this corporation, their people metaphor, is no longer a legal fiction, it is a magic wand. It endows these corporations with powers they wouldn't otherwise have. So corporations are not really people. You and I know that. But think of this, just take this out for a second. If corporation is a person, maybe it's a superhuman. Corporations never die. They don't feel any pain. They have no emotions. They have no need for beauty. They need resources. They consume resources that maybe you and I want to consume or enjoy, but they consume them. Or perhaps you, the worker, are a resource to be consumed or exploited by the corporation. If the labor force gets too expensive, they will pay you less, pay you as little as possible, so that they can preserve the bottom line, or if they get too expensive, they can send these jobs overseas and get cheaper workers overseas, or replace you with a robot, because that helps solve the bottom line. So to some extent, corporations become super predators that are harming us. They are not serving us, they are exploiting us. Now remember, we created them. Corporations were created by the states, and we created them to serve our purposes. So how do we solve this problem? Well, the easiest thing to do is simply find a better metaphor. Corporations are not people. Corporations are tools. Money is not speech. Money is a megaphone. When you think about corporations as tools, then the magic wand doesn't seem to have any function anymore. So, for example, you wouldn't want to try and endow a tool with powers to do something it's not designed to do. You wouldn't endow a hammer with the right to drive screws. That doesn't work. Can't do that, right? You don't try and give a tool a power that it's not intended to have. And it doesn't work. Now, Chief Justice Rehnquist, the late Chief Justice Rehnquist, understood this. He got it right. He understood this very clearly. He felt that he believed, and wrote an opinion that says that corporations are created by the state and given certain rights by the state, and if the corporations take rights beyond those, they may actually frustrate the purposes of the state, and therefore that shouldn't happen. Here's the quote from the case, First National Bank versus Bellotti, 1978. If states were free to limit the political speech of corporations, all natural persons who owe their existence to a higher sovereign than the Commonwealth remain as free as before to engage in political activity. In other words, we don't diminish human rights, human beings, if we limit the power of corporations to have certain free speech rights. Also notice what he's doing. God created man, man created corporations. Man doesn't have the same powers as God. Corporations do not have the same powers as people. The problem for us is that this great opinion was a dissenting opinion. His side lost. This view did not prevail. The majority in the Bellotti case said that corporations do have the right to spend money in support of ballot measures, and therefore money is speech. So the problem is that the Supreme Court can't seem to reason its way out of a bad metaphor. In a sense, the Supreme Court is sort of like Mickey Mouse in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Remember this? Mickey needs to carry water from a well outside into the chambers of the sorcerer inside. So rather than do the work itself, he uses tries to use magic to endow this tool, a broom, with a power it wasn't designed to have. So using magic, this tool comes to life, and Mickey's very happy. Here we go, we're on the ray. We're able to start filling up the well inside the house, inside the chambers, and Mickey is so happy he can just take a little nap and go to sleep and let things happen. Well, we all know what happened. It got crazy. The tool went nuts, The tool started doing things it wasn't supposed to do, and when Mickey woke up and realized what was going on, he wasn't able to stop it. He tried his best, but he could not figure out how to regain control of this tool. My friends, this is where we are today, right now. We are being inundated with corporate money speaking. Political rights are overwhelming us individually, and we're swirling the drain. This is where we are today. So how do we get out of this mess? Well, how did Mickey get out of the mess? The sorcerer reappeared and saw what was going on and used the power of magic to solve the problem. Right? Who is the sorcerer in our situation? It's you and me. It's us. We the people. We have the power to change the law. We can change the Constitution to declare that corporations are not people, money is not speech, and we can regain control of the situation. Now, I'm not here to tell you that corporations are evil, we need to abolish corporations, nothing like that at all. Corporations are tools. That's our new metaphor. Tools have uses. Corporations have uses. They're very good at helping us order our economic lives and raise large amounts of capital so that we can build transcontinental railroads and do big things. They're very useful tools, but they are tools. Let's use that metaphor to think about what corporations should be allowed to do. Change the metaphor, change the outcome. Thank you.